I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Jeff Harman. I am very excited about my third film. It is now in the editing process, hoping for a release roughly 6 months from now. We're having a fundraiser for marketing and advertising. If you'd like to make a donation, anything is greatly appreciated. Any donation of $100 or more, you get a film credit as well as a pre-release copy of the film. Be sure and watch my previous films. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku, Apple, a few more. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime and free on Relay. We are booking guests for April. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Jeff Harman. He is a second-generation astrologer and spiritual consultant with over 40 years of experience. He has also solved many paranormal cases involving haunted dwellings, UFO-related events, and possession. He has cleared people, homes, and commercial spaces experiencing negative spiritual attachments. Jeff, welcome back. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I always enjoy our discussions. It seems that every time we do speak, the world appears to be a much different one than previously and continues to rapidly change. What a time to be alive. I honestly could have never imagined the events that have recently come to pass, the unveiling of unspeakable evil being carried out by the ruling class, and now the declaration from Trump that he's going to be ordering release of UFO files. To me, it kind of seems suspect and rather convenient with the information surfacing, but of course, time will tell what'll come out of all of this. So we're going to get your thoughts about everything. There's a lot to get to and possibly explore the astrology surrounding all of this. Before we do, it's been a little while. Remind the audience about yourself and let them know how they can find out more.
Well, if anybody wants to get hold of me, the easiest way is the email, jeff@jeffharman.com, which is HARMAN.com. So it's just jeff@jeffharman.com. And then also check out my YouTube channel. I'm usually on in the week and also on Sundays. In fact, tomorrow I might actually have Chris Bledsoe on. He's
great.
He's one of the more well-known UFO guys right now. So
Yeah. And tell the audience that isn't familiar just a bit about your work.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time. My first exposure to this was back in the mid 70s. My mother turned me on to astrology, and her real interest was in medicine because she was a nurse and she was also a specialist in hemodialysis. So it was really fascinating to see, what she brought to the table with that. She was also telling me about my girlfriends, and she was amazingly accurate. And I just said, "What are you doing here?" And that's when she exposed me to astrology. And I was very skeptical because I've always heard the rumors, the moon and the stars, right? It's always, this skeptical outlook. And you hear the doctors say that there's more gravity from the doctor in the delivery room, right, than there is from Saturn, right? So, but I tell you, I changed my opinion pretty doggone fast when I started looking at it. It actually is a science. And even a lot of astrologers don't say it is, but it truly, truly is, especially when you get into the ancient Vedic astrology and what we call traditional or classical astrology. Absolutely amazing. It really shows the cycles.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about everything that's unfolding? As I said, so much has happened just in the short time since we last spoke. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on. I
There
mean,
is.
I think the biggest one that most of the psychics and astrologers have been quoting is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which we just finished yesterday. And, a lot of people were predicting the end of the world. California was going to slide off into the ocean. San Francisco was going to go, up in bubbles, underneath the water. And that hasn't happened. But what has happened is a lot of interesting stuff on the world stage, particularly, I think the fact that Trump, whether you like him or hate him, is going to now sign an executive order to bring disclosure and all the files out on UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them, right? Little green men, and all of the military data that can be declassified, brought out to the public. And I think that's huge. And that, when you talk about reality structure, Saturn and Neptune are an interesting combination of planets. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. This happens about every 36 years, give or take, that we get these two massive planets conjuncting. And, people listening might go, well, what does that mean? Well, conjunction just means it lines up 0 degrees in the sky from Earth's perspective. It's called a conjunction. And they're very powerful. And what this one represents, in my opinion, is a new reality structure coming into society. Now, this kind of stuff happens all the time. In fact, here, I had a client send me, if I can find it here, it's pretty doggone interesting. They had sent to me the different elements that had happened in society when Saturn and Neptune had conjuncted, come together. And I have to tell you, it was pretty fascinating. I don't know if I got it right here. I knew it was somewhere on all these papers. Just let me rattle this off here real quick.
Yeah.
This is kind of some fun facts. The last time Saturn and Neptune conjuncted, which was 1989, we got our 24-hour news, right? Before that was 1953. We had television. Before that was radio in 1917. Before that, in 1882, the phonograph and mass sound and photojournalism and phototelegraphs came into play. Now, if you keep going back farther, 1846, they actually, I can't believe it was this early, they had a fax machine and telegraph. And, we could keep leapfrogging back. So that's one of the major, you could say trigger points that always seems to bring in new realities or shifts our reality. And I think, if you've heard of the movie or the documentary called The Age of Disclosure, which I watched and I thought was amazing. Camille turned it on to me. And we actually watched it at the Hollywood Disclosure, and amazing stuff, because we don't have just, somebody saying, well, I just seen a UFO. No, we have people who are military pilots that are very balanced, very trained. We have people who are scientists, people who are engineers, not only intelligence people, but people in the secular world of, military, design, etc. And physicists coming forward and saying, look, we're not only are we not alone, we have been reverse engineering this stuff for probably the last 80 to 100 years. And if you go back further, you look at, Egypt and Easter Island and so many other monoliths and ancient evidence that's throughout this world. It's all over the place. I mean, we got drawings on cave walls of beings. And I don't think they're just extraterrestrial. I think when you look at Admiral Byrd and what had happened back in the late 40s and early 50s, there's overwhelming evidence they're right here. In fact, there's bases in just California alone, off in between Catalina Island and Laguna Niguel, as well as one right off where Zuma Beach is, out by Malibu, in between Malibu and Santa Barbara. Huge base underneath. There's a big arch. In fact, Google took it off. So this is going to be interesting, because I don't think it's going to be simple for the government to bring this out, because you're going to run into, oh, this is classified and that, we can release, and this will be redacted. But I think what's going to happen is people are going to realize this world is a lot more complex than it's ever been purported to be. And I always say the earth is the soul cauldron. And in my opinion, it is. It's literally where spirit becomes manifest in life, right? And the astrology is showing that that's where we're at. We're also in a time, and I've been mentioning this on my podcast, Uranus is another one that takes about 84 to 86 years to go around. Well, right now it's passing through the Pleiades, which is the seven-star group in the Pleiades called the Seven Sisters. There's a lot of ancient legends on this. And Uranus just went direct here at the beginning of the month, and it's now going to sweep over the fixed star Alcyon, which was, again, purported by many of the ancients to be an extremely important central star. In fact, some had said our solar system had revolved around it. Other people say, no, it's the galaxy. So very interesting stuff. And I don't think it's a galaxy, but there's dispute on exactly what Alcyon represents in terms of its astronomy. But in the ancient lore, it's extremely powerful. And when Uranus conjoins this, just to give you an idea, because people say, okay, this is all fascinating. What does it mean, right? The last time this happened was World War II. The time before that was the Civil War. The time before that was the Revolutionary War. The time before that, there was all kinds of plagues and dissension and war in Europe. But we keep leapfrogging back about every 84 to 86 years, approximately, it's not exact, you will get major change in dissension in the world. And it's pretty safe to say, World War I was a big one for sure. But World War II is really a marker point in the Industrial Revolution's evolution, even though the Industrial Revolution started much before that. That was the point where it really took off. I mean, we saw an acceleration in manufacturing and in growth in the world economies that was exponential. And now we're in another one. And I think this one is not only a high-tech revolution, but I think it's going to revolutionize the way we all live in much bigger ways. So this is huge cycles. These always go on. This actually started back in 2020, and not to sound conspiratorial, but I'm pretty sure George Carlin was right when he said, forget the politicians, you have owners. They own everything. They're at the top of the pyramid. Of course, I'm referring to the money supply, right? The makers. And there's all kinds of laws on that. Well, back in 1913, we know, Woodrow Wilson rubber stamped the Federal Reserve Act. And, to its credit, it is a regulated dispensary of money through the Fed and, of course, the Treasury Department. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And when you look at the amount of money that's splashed out into this Western world, it's almost inconceivable anyone would have that kind of callable collateral as a bank to probably put out like $150 trillion. And when you add the United States, what it handles, and the Western worlds in general, and all tied to the USD, it's absolutely phenomenal. So I think we're going to see changes that we've never seen in the modern times because of where the astrology is right now. And this is huge. And it started in 220. And I actually think, COVID was a trigger point. There's a lot of theories around COVID. A lot of people feel it was potentially released. I'm one of them. The evidence seems to point in that direction, and the astrology points in that direction. And that, that actually happened precisely on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I mean, you could have set your watch to it. And what's interesting is just following that, on the winter solstice of 2020, we had something called a great conjunction. It's actually called a mutation conjunction. People might say, well, what does that mean? Well, every 1,000 years approximately, it's about 900 something odd years, we get Jupiter and Saturn joining in the first tropical bound of Aries. And that only happens just approximately 1,000 years. Well, then every 240 years, it dances between different, what we call elements, earth, air, fire, and water, right? It actually makes the Star of David. And the last time it happened, we had the birth of the Industrial Revolution, which was in the 1700s. Even though it was rudimentary, it still was when it happened. And if you look at metallurgy, weaponry and steam and all that was coming in, And it really grew in the 1700s into the 1800s. Well, of course, it exploded in the 1900s. Well, in 2020, we had a 200 and approximate 40-year mutation conjunction. And those are huge because this actually happened right on the winter solstice. And what does it mean? It ushers in a new era. And we are going now from an old world of the Industrial Revolution to an amalgam now of high tech that I think we've never seen before. And well, we may have. They say we go around a central sun about every 26,000 years. It's actually a little less than that. Some say it's 25,700. Others say it's 25,900, but it's just short of 26,000 years. And everything could have happened similarly in a past cycle.
Yeah, I'm of the belief that there's nothing new under the sun, that cyclically we re-experience very similar events and possibly even technology. But I want to go back to the disclosure. You mentioned what this UFO disclosure may look like, maybe heavily redacted. What I find interesting is the information that conspiracy theorists and truthers have been providing over the past decade about the corruption, about the sex trafficking, things that you can find with a paper trail and have evidence for. They've been pretty spot on about most of this stuff. We move to the UFO paranormal side, and it's all over the place. They have theories that vary tremendously. People's experiences vary tremendously. Some people think we're dealing with angels and demons. Some people think we're dealing with little green men, extremely technological. What are your thoughts on the phenomena itself? Do you think the military has much more knowledge than your average conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, I really do. I've got several clients who are in the they're in the military business. They can't say much because all of it's classified. I've also got people who are in charge of certain things that are apparently in underground bases, and again, they can't say much. But one thing's for sure, I think there's been experimentation in not only propulsion systems, craft, and reverse engineering it, but I also think in genetics as well. We see the movies coming out of Hollywood, which is like X-Men and all of that. And of course, that equates to super soldiers. And, we had a little taste of what went on down in Venezuela. Literally they went in there and everybody there was dumbstruck. They said they had, blood coming out of their nostrils and ears, and they use psychotronic weapons. And I also think some of the reports where there were bullets flying from so many directions they couldn't figure it out, and it was overwhelming. The same thing happened in Iraq. When we look back 23 years ago, the same thing. They went in and overwhelmed them from every angle, and not only did they take out the air defenses, but the soldiers were saying, "This is crazy." It's so psychically disturbing that they just threw up their hands and surrendered. And don't be surprised if we go into Iran real soon and the same techniques are used, if not more advanced. Now, some of this could be the evolution of military, but I also think there's technologies that we have that may not be allowed to be used. I know in the 70s, I was actually tracking craft that were very hard to see, but they would pulse, triangular craft, cigar-shaped craft, and also circular. And what's really fascinating about this is in the documentary Age of Disclosure, the number of people had mentioned, particularly physicists, had said they actually can create a different time-space continuum, and that's why they're not able to be seen very well. So I think this is so vast that there's no way it's going to be disclosed totally, in a unredacted, disclosure. I just don't see it. But I think to those who have eyes and do the research and want to jump on the internet or look at other areas of documentation that's out there, there's secret space programs, there's underground stuff going on, there's cloning going on, all this stuff. And people say, oh, this is conspiracy theory. Well, I beg to differ. That's my opinion, because And I think the astrology right now shows that we're now in an age of disclosure going forward much greater than we've been in the past. And when you get into genetics and all these different elements here that are being played with, it's a very dangerous thing. And I actually think that a lot is going on in that area. And again, we go back to some of the biblical texts. Look at the Book of Enoch, where they talk about all this genetic manipulation was going on. That's what it really seems to be talking about. And of course, that caused the flood. So I always have to go back to, no matter how you slice and dice this pie, divinity sure seems to be there. I mean, one thing, we can clone, we can replicate and all that, but we can't create. And, one of the things I love about astrology is it really proves we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. This is a reality machine here. And we don't think about that much, but you look at a baby being born and then watch its genetics unfold. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, we go from little teeny tiny hands to adults. And we also look at animals and plant life. I just don't think we're going to get there anytime real soon to create life from scratch. There's the old magical documents that talk about the golem, right? Remember the golem?
Yeah.
That was kind of the Frankenstein myth, where you could create life from clay, right? And there was all these rituals. Well, it's not like us, I mean, you look at how intelligent human beings are, and life itself, it's literally divine, and it truly, truly is. And yes, we're all going to die. But, this goes back to the ancient Vedas. The Vedas actually said God destroys the universes about every 4.3 to 4.6 billion years. It's not exact, but it's a long time. And that's billion, So when you think about that, it's like, wow. And many of the quantum physicists and theoretical physicists and astrophysicists are all saying the same thing. They're saying, well, the universe is about 4.3 to 4.6 billion years. And I'm like, so when you look at this, it's absolutely, amazing how some of these ancient texts line up with a lot of today's discoveries in science. Absolutely amazing when you think about it. Some will say, well, it's the Big Bang Theory, right? And other goes, oh, no, it's contracting. Well, maybe it's both. There's the infinite loop of time, and there's an ancient system in quote unquote Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology's real name is actually called Jyotisha, which I thought was an interesting word because it actually means the science of the light of the soul. And it isn't just astrology. A lot of people say, well, I'm a Vedic astrologer, which is fine. And I love Vedic astrology. I think it's profound on the path of the soul. But it's much more than that. It's a look-see into reincarnation, also what the soul is here doing, dissipating karmic, you could say, energies. The earth is like a grounding rod. And if you've ever played with electricity, you'll know you're not going to get too far if you don't have a ground, right? If you don't ground the circuit, not going nowhere. That's why we have two plugs, actually three, on the circuits we plug in with all our appliances, right? One is the voltage, the other one is the ground, the common, and then the other one's the earth ground. Well, it's kind of like that life where these bodies seem to be, if you will, places where spirit plays out karma in time. And when you look at it from that standpoint, and you look at the world and all the things that happen, it can give you a different perspective. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything is totally making sense on some things that happen, but we're all evolving. I'll say that.
Any thoughts about what we are dealing with when we talk about extraterrestrials? Even at high levels, you look at the Collins elite, for example. These are very seemingly powerful individuals and groups that believe that these are demonic forces. Then you have a whole nother faction of high-level UFO researchers, or even people that are involved with three-letter agencies or the military, that believe we're definitely dealing with off-planet intelligences, non-human biologics.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on what we're really dealing with?
Well, it may be all of them. And,
Mm.
that there might not be any simple answer to that. I think there's clearly demonic forces here. I mean, if you
Can't
go
hear you.
back to the Epstein files and
Jeff,
you
I
look
can't hear
at
you. Oh,
some
there
of
you
the
go.
things that are disclosed in that, I mean, we're literally talking about cannibalism here, sacrificial stuff that really mirrors a demonic, if you will, ritual. And that's stuff that, I've been around in terms of with clients having been exposed to this. I also did some forensics work back in the 80s and 90s, and I've had people in government tell me, and in law enforcement, there's satanic rituals going on in various different places. They've been tracking it, they know what's going on. Um, so this is nothing new. In fact, I think this goes back to antiquity. I mean, we even heard about, in the Holy Land, there was the sacrifices of the firstborn to Baal, right? And they beat the
Mm.
drums so that the parents couldn't hear the child scream when they hit the fire. So,
Wow.
this is not something new on this planet. I think, I personally think, here, if I can share my screen, I'm going to show
Sure.
you a diagram that I think helps at least demonstrate a little bit of this. So I'm going to come in here, and this is a diagram that I use an awful lot, and I love this diagram because what it does is well, hang on here, let's get to the right one. There we go. Is this diagram right here.
Mm.
And what I love about Zoom is I got my little pen here. So you can see no matter what your belief in, if you will, divinity, God, what have you, light in the sky, however you want to play it, right? And the religions have many versions of this. But they say the light of divinity is actually too bright to get into creation, and that's what this Ein Sof Or is. That's an expression where there are lenses that come down into creation. And they say our souls are created way, way up here. There's no astrology up here. This is very divine stuff. They claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions up here. Extremely divine. The next worlds down is where a lot of what they call purified souls or advanced souls lie. Again, there's no astrology as we would know, at least not that anything I know about. This big red line is the division, if you will, into the multiverses or the material worlds. Now, this isn't just my theory at all, because there's a text actually called the Sefer Yetzirah. And notice this is called the worlds of Yetzirah, if I zoom in on that, see? And what does that mean? Well, this is where molecular matter and also you could say dense matter, because it isn't just molecular. There's a lot of research being done right now into plasma physics and many other types of physics that quantum physicists are playing with. And they claim there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions within them. Well, notice if we keep going down, then we get into the astral worlds, which is, kind of in between the material, and it's sandwiched in between what you could say the Earth and other planets like Earth and the actual heavens themselves. And this is an interesting thing to look at, because now we go back to why I brought this diagram up. And when you talk about angels, demons, UFOs, and all this stuff, well, everyone's heard in the Western world of the Garden of Eden story, right? We all heard of that. And I think that's a lot more true than we know. They actually say, in fact, the Vedas say the same thing. If you get into the Chaldean stuff, definitely talks about there's this war in heaven. And God got ticked off, if you will, in the upper angels and cast down the evil spirits. Now, in the Western world, you'll get a guy with a suit tie and a microphone telling you about the devil, right? But it's just a little bit deeper than that. Not that I'm saying anybody's wrong or right, but they say these are the first four: Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. And interestingly enough, if you go into the Vedantic lore, you'll find parallels almost exactly to this. They just call them different things. Same thing with the Chaldean magic. Absolutely amazing. And what's fascinating is beneath that is there's 8 subdemons beneath that. And then there's legions upon legions beneath that. Well, if you go into physics, any physicist will tell you everything is opposing forces. You know, we have day, we have night for simplicity's sake, but look at an atom. It has protons and electrons, and then it has other energies flowing in and around, of course, neutrinos and all these other things that they speak about in physics. Well, what's fascinating is it may be that the evil spirits are imprisoned in matter itself, that matter itself is a part of the imprisonment that they got with, if you could say, the story of being cast down. And when you look at in the Vedas, and of course, in common sense, we all know everything is born, it matures, it grows, and it atrophies and it dies. And not just the human kingdom. They say all kingdoms, whether it's above human life or below, the animals, the plants, the minerals. In fact, again, now you get into the Vedas. Every 4 point something billion years, the whole, you could say structures of creation implode or explode, however you want to say it, or are destroyed, and then they're recreated. So creation never stops. And many of your really advanced physicists will tell you time is an infinite loop. It's where the figure 8 come from, infinity. That it never stops. It's an infinite loop of time. Well, there's an ancient type of Vedic astrology known as the Kala Chakra Dosha. Kala means wheel, chakra means time. And it's the wheel of time. And really, there is no time. And when you think about time, it's kind of an illusion, really, and not that it isn't. I mean, call me on the first of the month, right? When it's bill time, right? But every day we all experience sunrise, we experience noon, we experience sunset, and we experience midnight. And every month we see the moon go around the earth, and every year we see the seasons change as this planet orbits the sun. Now, even to the flat earthers, this whole model of astronomy is in fact happening. And no matter what you think the sun is, it's still, you try living without it. Look at how cold it gets in the winter when it's, way down there. In fact, we're in the final phases of winter right now, approaching the spring equinox. And everything is based on the 7 inner planets, the 7 days of the week, the 7 holes in your head, 7 halls of heaven. What's 7 times 7? 49. And that's where you get back into these dimensions. So what's interesting is, everyone will throw the common sense thing up in the air and say, well, it's impossible that we're alone, right? There's so many billions and trillions of stars out there. Well, I would have to agree with that one. Secondly, who says we're alone on the earth anyhow? So you can't trust the history books. They've all been completely Rothschildized ever since the 20s, maybe a little sooner, somewhere around the early portion of last century. We've had so much infiltration. And now you get to the Epstein files and you go, well, what would possess a human being to do this to another human being? I mean, this isn't sex only. This is some really twisted, demonic stuff.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of people who've come forward and not only spoken about this stuff in mind control, but, we're all familiar with the book 1984 by George Orwell. I think some of the stuff they got going on is way past that. And the Epstein files is just, I think, one viewpoint that got documented that is now being actually exposed to the public, which again is this new reality coming in since the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which ironically is all happening right as this happened, plus disclosure. So I think we've got angels. I think we've got, and if we didn't, they actually say if the upper angels, the Orphanum, the Seraphim, the Cherubim, the Thrones, whatever you want to call them, we're not chanting the permutations of creation, which is also believed to be divinity or God's name, the entire universes would cease to exist in less than a nanosecond. And I think that's probably right, maybe shorter than that. Clearly we've got something divine here going on. I mean, watch a bird land on a wire or a branch, and you try and do that with that dexterity with a plane or a helicopter. Not going to happen. So life is magical, in my opinion. I mean, when you look at, again, an embryo to a baby or an animal or any life, that's some pretty magical stuff. And then we all have autonomy, meaning that we all have free will, right? Even though it doesn't seem like it, we do. We all make choices throughout our lives, right? Edgar Casey often said, is astrology, or they asked him, is astrology accurate? And he said, yeah, the water level's like right here. In other words, it's very powerful, but the free will and the consciousness is above it. And that's the only thing we take with us. See, they actually say when we exit the womb, that's when time starts. And when we exit the body, that's when it stops as we know it. And that's when we hit the astral worlds. And this is where I think the religions have failed quite sorely. Not all of them, but a lot of them. That, you're all sinners and you're all going to hell just doesn't cut it. Whereas if we realize that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, then this lower conscious mind is not us. It's the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes, or if you like, the mouse, screen, and the keyboard in modern vernacular. Right? So, we're really here as short sojourners. It's kind of like the Westerns. We're just passing through, and a lot of us keep coming back a multiple amount of times, and no one knows when that is. Now, Vedic astrology has indicators when that potato is ready to come out of the oven and move on. By the configurations of the chart. So it's interesting stuff, and again, I always, get a lot of humility the more I study astrology. And, I've been blessed to be around this stuff for over 50 years now. And I can tell you, the more I get to know, the more I kind of am in awe of the complexity of this matrix that astrologers call astrology. And it's really not just astrology. It's an interactive consciousness to who we are. And it interacts completely different from everyone, completely. And, here's a great little model here. I always love to show this. Psychology will tell us we have a so-called subconscious mind, which is up here, which is really the three upper layers of the soul. And then we have a so-called conscious mind down here. Well, what's quite interesting, there's text, and particularly one of them called the Sefer Haggadah, that actually says an angel fishes us out of wherever the soul might lie and attaches us to mom's embryo at conception, not at birth. And the 9 months of gestation, we are believed to be in some kind of a converse with that. Well, when we exit mom's womb, also known as birth, right? And the umbilical cord is cut, and we enter the air of the world and draw that first breath into the lungs. That's when time starts. That's when astrologers say, oh, here's your ascendant, here's your sun, and they'll tell you, you are your sun sign. We're not. That is a reflection of the soul's journey in time, the entire chart, not just the sun sign. Modern astrology is kind of digressed into love, light, and cluelessness, so it is getting better. Where the ancient astrology really had depicted that this was a print of where the soul's timing would unfold in time and space. And what's interesting is then you get into when a child is born, you could break this down even further. This isn't just the so-called subconscious mind up here anymore, way up at the top here. But you have not only the conscious mind, but you could break that into two segments. One is the spiritual part of it, which is our logic, our reason, and our, you could say, deductionary reasoning. And then you have the moon, which is the emotional, you could say, response patterns. It's our emotional perception of reality. Most Vedic astrology has a very detailed analysis of the moon and its positions in what we call divisional charts, which is a pretty good attempt at looking at the emotional nature of an individual or human being. And what's fascinating is this is not us. This is the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes, controlling and interfacing with this miraculous body that we all have. So, and what's fascinating is when we exit the body, known as death, many people report NDEs, out-of-body experiences, OBEs, all these fancy acronyms, right? And we're lost. There's a really good, like the telepathy tapes. I don't know if you've heard of this. Amazing stuff. In fact, I just had a lady on, Laura Hirsch, whose son actually is deemed autistic by the medical community. But yet these kids are exceedingly intelligent because they are able to tap into the psychic world. They can talk to deceased animals, deceased relatives. They can read people's minds, and yet they're deemed, incompetent in society, right? That's why the IQ test always kind of bothered me, because it's a measurement of how much you packed in your head and can regurgitate, even though it is a measurement of intelligence, no question. I'm not saying it isn't. What I am saying is a measurement of lower intelligence, not wisdom and intuition, which is far superior. And what's interesting is if you zoom out on this diagram, you notice right up here, there's our little friend Saturn. And Saturn is literally the gatekeeper of time. Look at its glyph. It's the cross over the crescent of the moon. See, all the glyphs of the planets are very ancient. They come from the sun, which is the portal to creation outside of these lower heavens. That's why they're so bright and emit so much magical energies. Doctors will tell you, go out there and get some vitamin D, right? Or vitamin E, and all these things that come through. And then plasma physicists are looking at all this magnetics coming off these planets, energized particles. It's far more than we can understand from a scientific standpoint. Science has brought us a lot. I have great respect for science, believe me. But on the other hand, we hit the wall once we even try and define what the hell energy is. We don't even know what it is. So the suns are that. They're portals. The moon is the crucible. Dad puts the seed in mom's womb. Farmer puts the seed in the ground, and spirit becomes manifest on the physical plane of the earth. There's that cross again. Sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight. It's a freaking time machine. And it really is. It's in fact, it's amazing. When you're born, the next 100 days of celestial motion equals the next 100 years in your birth chart.
Oh, wow.
And it's so accurate, it's creepy. So again, notice Saturn is the cross. Previously concretized energies that now become manifest through your emotional perception of reality. This is why every astrologer on the planet will talk about Saturn. Saturn returns, Saturn transiting the moon, all these things. We just had Saturn in the sky conjunct Neptune. Well, what does that mean? Again, reality shift. See, Neptune might actually be the portal to other realities. Even in a human being, look at it's the portal between, you could say, our so-called subconscious mind, which I think is much more than just the subconscious mind, into our reality. See, there's Neptune right there. It is the crescent of the moon bent upwards over the cross. So it's, in some ways, our intuitive psychic connectivity to the lower self. And the whole world just had that yesterday. It just separated yesterday. And again, everybody was predicting the end of the world like they always do when big planets conjunct. And to their credit, we do see that sometimes. Look at 9/11. That happened on a Saturn-Pluto opposition. Again, COVID happened on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. World War I started right at a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I could keep going on all day here. So the astronomical coincidences to life on Earth are pretty compelling, whether you believe it or not. And the statistical analysis is beyond, mind-blowing, actually. So anyways, I just thought I would throw a little bit of that out there because we're, when you talk about angels, UFOs, demons, I think it's all going on. I think so much is going on, we can't even figure it out. I know I can't.
As far as those realms of creation, the realms beyond perception, most spiritual teachers believe that those can be accessed within. Would you say that those are also representative of our levels of consciousness?
Yep. One of my more favorite psychiatrists, which, of course, Dr. Carl Jung, Freud and Jung broke apart because Freud wanted to stay in the linear left brain models. And what did Carl Jung do? He started exploring not only celestial phenomena, which astrologers call astrology, I should say, but he also looked at how does that correlate with the mind and the reality structures. Speaking of the Matrix, there was a little book here. See if I can find it. Yeah. This is, I can never pronounce this guy's name, but it was Jean Boulard, and it's simulacra in simulation. Well, how many people have we heard lately, especially theoretical physicists, quantum physicists, talk about this is a simulation? Look at Steven Spielberg's movie Men in Black. At the end, he's got all these realities shrinking down in these little bubbles, right? And when you think about it, this book is one of several that address. In fact, this was not the book that's purportedly wrote The Matrix, but it was consulted, I'll say that, by the Coen brothers or sisters, whatever they are now. But the bottom line is, it is an interesting look-see into our reality system here. And I think planet Earth is a reality system. And when you talk about these different dimensions, I think it's a great thing to be talking about, because we're all going to go to them sooner or later. I mean, if anyone can figure out how to defy death, please let me know. It's not going to happen. In the genetic world, everything is born, it grows, it matures, it atrophies, and it passes on, except the spirit. There is your realms. If you look at, there's something, not only is there the Sefer Yetzirah, which it means the book of creational physics or physical worlds. You also have what they call Asaya, which is the astral worlds. And the Buddhas talked about this. This is where the term loka comes from. There's all these different dimensions. And yes, meditation, advanced things. A lot of people have heard of Merkaba and all these different things, and they give classes on how to do that. Personally, I think that is something that is very dangerous, one. Number two, you need to, I think, evolve into this in a spiritual way. And that might be what these incarnations do. I mean, if we do go around this central sun, and they say it's a binary sun, many people have heard of Nibiru and all that. So there's a lot we don't know. And there's a lot I think NASA's finding out that they're not telling us. And I think there's a lot that is known that is kept exceedingly close to the vest, which kind of gets into the realm of the disclosure thing here, So, there's things going on here in this reality structure of time and space that the religions and I think the people in the know are not disclosing. And, it's very interesting. A lot of people talk about this planet is the soul trap. And the moon takes about 28 days to go around, 27 and a half to 28 and a half days. It's not linear because of the elliptical orbit, right? Or timing of it. Now, it takes 29.5 approximately to catch back up to the sun, because you got to remember, from each new moon, the sun jumps ahead another sign, right? Approximately 30 degrees, right? 1 degree per day. Well, it's 29.5 is one of the mathematics on it. Guess how long it takes Saturn to go around the solar system and come back to where it was? About 29.5 years. It's not exact, but close. Well, isn't that interesting? 29.5 days average to 29.5 years. And Saturn is the cross over the perceptual emotional reality we are in here. This is the soul trap. There's actually a text that many of them, but one in particular I always quote. It's known as the Sharar HaGilgam, which is a strange title that means the gates of reincarnation. And even though Rome, ever since Constantine at least, has taken Christianity and threw it in the bottom of the Vatican and then told everybody what to think, right? So I'm not saying everything in Christianity is bad, because it's great stuff. I love Sermon on the Mount. I think it's one of the most truthful documents ever written in any of the religions. But I'm talking about the politicization and also what has happened to the hiding of knowledge on consciousness and human existence. And the demonic spirits would be the ones I would point to for doing this. They want to suppress and keep us. They're Saturnian cults, the worshiping Satan and Luciferian cults. There's all kinds of cults. And of course, many people refer to these as secret societies. But, it's very interesting how there is this pull to keep consciousness in the material worlds. I always, had heard federal agents and police officers always tell me in forensics, they would say, we look for three things. We look for either revenge, right, money, or lust. Isn't that interesting?
Very.
And you could break that down into a few more, but that's pretty much the umbrellas that everything would fit under, And when it comes to violent or in really evil crime and power goes under that. See, lust isn't just sex, though that's a big part of it, but it's lust for power, lust for the material world. You see, and some people are so enamored with that, and we hear these people are trying to clone things so they can take our consciousness, like that movie, download it.
Yeah. Did I hear you say that meditation could be dangerous?
No, I don't think meditation is dangerous at all. What you heard me say was that there's certain astral worlds and techniques that are available that you have to be very careful with.
Now that makes me think about a guest I had who was doing forms of deep meditation and essentially got trapped in one of the realms, which seemed like an eternity for him, but it was only a few hours in the material realm, but it terrified him. He had to go through these initiations and processes before he could even escape that realm. Is this what you're referring to?
Yeah, there's many people who have heard of path working in the Kabbalistic stuff. And there's other techniques in the Vedantic where there's a requirement to get into some of these very divine dimensions or heavens of purity of the soul. And, it's not like you buy a plane ticket and say, hey, let's fly here. You really have to maybe get into preparation. I'm not here telling anybody what to do. But yes, some of these very advanced places, some call them astral temples, some of them call different Sephirotic journeys on the tree of life. There's many ways that this has been approached, and there's a lot of very interesting documents about this. Most of it was handed down verbally in secret societies. Masonic, once you start getting into this stuff, it gets into that. I don't want to say too much, but I had met Manly P. Hall, who many people may have heard of him. He wrote the book Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Got it right there.
Yeah. And Manly was pretty old when I met him. This was back in the 80s. And he was an interesting guy. He was a 32nd degree Mason. He had written a lot of books on astrology. Some of them are not the traditional sense, but they're good. They're good. Astrology is so vast. You can talk to 100 different astrologers. You're going to get some variations of what they think and the techniques that they use. That's because astronomy or astrology is so vast, no human being will ever figure it out. I really believe it's the matrix of creation, not just the soul of creation itself. And I think that changes. There's evidence that our solar system has shifted. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Ancient Sumerian legends said it was a war, and it was a palatial planet. It got destroyed, and everything moved. In physics, there's something called standing waves. And standing waves are very interesting because they're locked. It's energy locked in a state. In acoustics, we would study this stuff. And it's done in plasma. All kinds of different physics looks at standing waves. And there's things called nodes and antinodes. Nodes are points of joining, antinodes is places of maximum motion. Well, if you look at the solar system, it's locked. I mean, we back in the early 80s, it was late 70s, early 80s, Robert Hand and I and a few other people were talking. This was kind of the birth of astrology programs, where programmers had to take the motions of the planets and put them into programs. Because today, everybody doing astrology is using an astrology program. And you should, because they save hours of calculations. I mean, when I do readings, if I had to do all the calculations by hand, I wouldn't get but 10% done that I can do now. So it's amazing. But here's the point, and this is what I wanted to get to. This solar system is so synchronized, it's crazy. It's creepy how accurate it is. Yeah, there's wobble to the planets and all this stuff, and people say, oh, magnetics are moving. It is, but you can actually time. NASA was actually collaborating with some of these programmers, some of the early programmers in astrology. They're called ephemerises. And when I first started studying astrology, you got out a book and you looked up where all the planets were at a time of a person's birth or on a question, and you would color it in a chart. You literally sit there. In fact, I was doing that as late as the 90s with Vedic astrology, because there was no Vedic astrology programs that were good at that time. And that didn't happen until the early 90s into the mid 90s. And we were literally, I still have the book sitting on the shelf where you'd crack them open, figure out where the moon was, and do all the lunar mansions and figure out the doshas. It was a lot. Today I click a button and, everything's calculated. So here's the point. How could that happen if we weren't living in a synchronized universe? And we are. It's so synchronized, it's eerie. These planets don't just ascend and descend kind of close. They're to the millisecond. They're to the millisecond. You take the moon. I mean, it has eclipses and all these things that happen. But the Chaldeans were figuring this stuff out thousands of years ago. Like this eclipse we just had on the 17th, exceedingly powerful. That was called, I think it was, 10 North? Now, what does that mean? That means it's a Saros cycles that the Chaldeans thousands of years ago coded. And they knew that these eclipses would happen, and they were like birth charts, and they would exist sometimes up to a couple thousand years. In fact, the one we just had on the 17th started at the North Pole in 944 AD. That's over 1,000 years ago. And you take that energy that happened right when that eclipse happened, and that series now repeats itself over the next 1,500 years, 2,000 years, however long it lasts. And I have tables, because I can't remember this stuff. And what's eerie about it is how accurate they are. This eclipse that we just had on the 17th was about two wrestlers of one good, one evil, wrestling, fighting. And this is a very high tension energy right now. And these eclipses last, sometimes the amount of time they last is the amount of months or years that they influence the world. And, to the naysayers, I say, well, go back and look and start tracking some of these eclipses. And you also look at how they line up with other things, like this last eclipse happened exceedingly close to the Neptune-Saturn conjunction, which I think is going to put even more emphasis on the tug of war between good and evil to release a lot of secret information. Not only stuff like Epstein files, demonic things going on, but things that are going on with disclosure, UFOs, advanced physics. One of the, if anybody hasn't seen the documentary Age of Disclosure, I highly recommend you go watch it. This isn't just, I seen a UFO. This is people who are really smart, intelligent, military, physicists, and contractors who are all saying, look, not only are we not alone, we've been reverse engineering it for probably the better part of a century. So, and I think longer. And I think this has been secretly kept inside of the elite for possibly thousands of years. And there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, look at Admiral Byrd I think it was in the mid 40s. Don't quote me, but he had taken a squadron. Our government funded millions of dollars. This huge armada went down into Antarctica. Everybody's enamored with Antarctica, right? And also Arctica as well, or the Arctic. Well, what happened is apparently they took a squadron down over this ice wall, and there's a lot of videos about this stuff. There's these huge ice walls. It's kind of like, does the world end there? Well, they went underneath, and they were brought down by these beings who said, look, we now know you guys have figured out nuclear weapons, and we will stop you. And, a lot of people laugh and say, oh, that's just, rumors. Oh, really? Well, there's military commanders who've come forward, like Minot Air Force Base is just one example. And I've actually sat and listened to some of these people at UFO research places, MUFON, and also, this summer there's I forget what the name of it is, but there's a lot of great symposiums that go on with some really smart people who are presenting evidence that's overwhelming. Overwhelming. We don't even need disclosure. You just need to go look at what's out there already. Yeah. And what's fascinating is how they literally have said, we've seen orbs. These are commanders in the military. So we've seen orbs around our missile installations, and afterwards quits working. We
Yeah.
got to replace circuit boards.
Mm.
I think there's been interventions that have prevented massive, you know, breakouts of war. And I think our leaders in our so-called governments, are clearly aware of this, that there is certain lines that cannot be crossed at this time.
Yeah.
Conventional stuff seems to go on. And I think this whole thing in Ukraine and Russia is way deeper than they're telling us. We see, a couple of guys loading shells in a cannon, and we'll see some, little videos on news reports. But I think that rabbit hole goes really deep over there. I think there is some very, very creepy stuff that was going on in Ukraine. I mean, let's remember, folks, look at all the stuff that was going on that we heard about, which was with the Bidens and Burisma and all this other stuff that was happening. That's just on the surface. That's what leaks out. That's the stories that keep us looking over here, right? So we don't look behind the curtain over there. And I really think there's something far deeper here going on.
Any theories as to what that might be?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into that, but my opinion is I think there's some really underground stuff going on there. Some quite potentially deep stuff that's being hidden.
Right on.
And that's one of the theories. Of course, we hear about the labs, we hear about all this other stuff, but I think there's some really powerful things going on. I can tell you there's a little area over there called Galatia, which is much older than Ukraine itself and Poland, but that is some of the most powerful people in the world came out of that area. And that has a long history. And when you look down the rabbit hole of what's really going on here, I've seen people shapeshift. I've seen people's hands turn into a claw. I think there's stuff going on here that's way deeper than we know. And most of us can thank God literally that we are protected from a lot of this very crazy stuff. We live out our lives and we move on. And but I think this is a very dynamic planet, to say the least.
And we are also in very fascinating times. I tell you what, I've got my popcorn ready for anything that is upcoming. Speaking of what could be upcoming, is there any astrological alignments that we should be looking out for? Anything upcoming?
Well, I mean, they're always going on. I mean, astronomers and astrologers are constantly on the internet talking about this. The biggest one is the one we just had yesterday, which is the Saturn Neptune, which is bringing in an awareness of new realities and exposures to things. But see, it doesn't just mean people will go, well, yeah, but, nothing happened to me yesterday, right? Well, this is a marker point. It's just like COVID. It's just like 9/11. It's just like all these other things, the Federal Reserve Act, World War I, all these things. They are all trigger points that change the world going forward. It's like turning pages in a book. I think we're moving into a new chapter now of not only AI, but advanced stuff that is going to start to surface in the world that becomes more consciously accepted. Many people are stating that this conjunction has a huge effect on expanding consciousness, and it very well could, depending on how it aspects each individual in your birth chart. Like you look at the house that it happened, the aspects it made, etc. Some people will be in confusion and delusion. Other people might really see an expanded consciousness, depending on not only where it happens in your birth chart, but each birth chart is a kind of a print of where the soul might be in its journey of reincarnational evolution, which is far beyond just your birth chart, and that's deep stuff where I think Vedic astrology and another one called Nadi, people may have heard of the Nadi palm leaves. Well, there's also a whole branch of astrology that's a division of Jyotisha, or you could say Vedic astrology, that looks at it from that perspective. And you start seeing like the sun is the father, right? The moon is the mother, which are always two big central figures in our lives. I mean, let's face it, even if your parents split up, they still have a big impact on where you came from and the influences on the formative years psychologically that we all were exposed to. So really powerful stuff. And it's fascinating to me to look at what we call progressions and primary directions. Those are fancy words that just mean looking at the celestial motions that were in play when you drew first breath and how these release in what we call time, because time is real for all of us. I mean, once you really, get back into your life and you start, you got to go to the grocery store, you got to take out the garbage, you got to pay your bills, you got to pay your taxes, you got to take care of life, right? So we all got to sleep, eat, and wash the clothes, right? Nobody gets around that one. And last I checked, everybody still puts their pants on one leg at a time, right? So we're all in this reality world. We have to be. So time is a very real thing. But when you look at the ancient astrology or the Vedic and the traditional, I also want to say, a lot of people, the Vedic astrology gets touted as it's the only one that's accurate. That's not true. The Egyptian, Chaldean, and the Grecian, Hellenistic stuff, all the medieval astrology was profound in some of the techniques that it also used. So I find both, East and West bring some really interesting viewpoints on the journey of the soul, which is pretty interesting stuff.
Jeff, this was fascinating. We will, of course, have to do this again in the future. Before I let you go, remind the audience how they can get all your content, find out more about you.
Oh, yeah. The best, I do YouTube channels. I like to be more regular. It's just the last couple of months I've been busy. But I'm going to do one tomorrow. I do my podcasts. I try and do them at least twice a week in either lives or recorded podcasts. So hopefully tomorrow, Chris Bledsoe just called me last night. If anybody who doesn't know who he is, he wrote UFO of God, and he's actually working with people in the government. He's working with people all over the place, some really well-known researchers. And he texted me last night. I said, "Hey, let's do a podcast." I said, "Okay, great." So he's going to let me know if he can. He's got his grandson coming in tomorrow. So we'll probably put that up tomorrow. And if not, we'll record it and get it up later. But my podcast, Jeff Harman Astrologer, also my website is jeffharman.com. It's Jeff at jeffharman.com. Or you can just go to my website, Jeff Harman. It's Harman. So, it's been a lot of fun for me to step into this world of psychology, astrology, spiritualism, mysticism, and paranormal research, which has always been attractive to me since I was just a little boy. And It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, this has been a lot of fun as well. Jeff, thank you so much. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will talk again tomorrow. Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description. If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order.